Thunder rattled Mike's bedroom walls. He heard heavy rain dropping rat-tat at the window pane behind his blackout curtains. The brilliant sunlight that had ushered in the day had thrown into the tower when heavy storm clouds had descended on the town just before lunch. Since then, the day had been dark and dreary. Mike's mood had been similarly changed. The surge of optimism Mike had felt at the start of the day had diminished as the day had gone by. He wanted it back, and he had a plan to reclaim it. Planting his feet wide on his bouncy mattress, one foot close to the edge, Mike reached up to try to untape his Nebraska poster from the ceiling over his bed. He managed to slid his fingers under one edge of the thick paper. "What are you doing?" Abby's voice came right on the heels of another clap of thunder. The combination of the boom and her unexpected appearance startled Mike. He jerked, and his foot slipped off the edge of the bed. Mike was tumbling. His fingers caught a big clank of the poster, and he took a chunk with him on the floor. Having managed to land head and shoulders first, Mike shifted his rump and rubbed his head. He looked towards the doorway. Abby just stood a foot inside Mike's room, dressed in her usual overalls. Today were bright blue. She wore Mike's Freddy's Fazbear security vest. Even though Mike was annoyed by the interruption in his torn poster, he had to admit that Abby looked pretty adorable in the vest, like she was playing dress-up, something he'd never seen her do before. Mike massaged his throbbing shoulder. "Did you want something?" he asked Abby. Abby looked at the ceiling, and Mike's gaze followed her. The part of the poster he hadn't just ripped free dangled down towards the bed. The remains bit read pining for fun. Mike sighed. He pointed at Abby. "All right, come on. Take that off. I need to go to work." Abby nodded. "I know. I'm coming with you." Mike grunted and stood. He pressed a hand in his temple. Another headache was coming on. It just hadn't been his collision on the floor. His mood had been spiraling downward all day. And now, even though he had a plan to retrieve the hope he felt earlier, he dreaded having to go back to the spooky restaurant. He wasn't up for Abby's games. "Abby, please," Mike said. He held out a hand. Just give me the vest." Abby didn't move, so Mike walked towards her and reached the vest. Abby stepped back. "No!" Abby shouted. Mike really wanted to scream at her. He hated when she got like this. Something what little patience he had available to him, which wasn't much. Mike knelt in front of Abby. He took a second to make sure that when he spoke he wouldn't explode. Then he said, in what he hoped was a calm and firm tone, "Give me the vest now." Abby made a face, then mimicked him. "I'm coming with you." Mike heard the front door bang open. Even from down the hall, the sound of Mike's footstep was clear. The tap-tap was joined by a fluttery noise. Given the thumping of the rain of the roof overhead, Mike guessed that Max was shaking under her umbrella. "Hello?" Max called out. Abby turned toward the hallway. Mike lunged at her. When Maxine heard Abby's shriek, she rushed towards the hallway. Looked down the length of the narrow, empty space. Maxine started forward. Was Abby really in trouble, or was she having one of her... Abby screamed again. As she did, Mike, holding a wildly flaying Abby in her arms, stepped into view. So that question was answered. Maxine wiped rain off her face. The umbrella hadn't been much help in the windy storm, as she watched Mike carry his sister to the room. Mike sat Abby down as she lunged away from him. He grabbed the vest she was wearing and pulled it off. He quickly slammed Abby's door and locked it. Abby continued to cartwheel from within her bedroom. Most of her noise was just general wailing, but mixed in with some impressive beyond her age slur words and her sketching opinions of her brother. Maxine agreed with a few of them. Panting, Mike looked down the hall and met Maxine's gaze. "Hey, Max," he said. She lifted a hand, signaling for him to stop. Mike pointed at Abby's closed door. He acted like he couldn't hear any of the insults and howling reaching from the flimsy wooden barrier. "She's all yours," Mike said. Max raised an eyebrow and quirked her lips. "Great." When Mike got to work, he didn't waste his time freaking himself out by looking around the pizzeria. The lobby and hallway looked the same as they had the day before. He assumed everything else was status quo, too. And if it wasn't, he didn't want to know about it. As soon as Mike entered the office and closed and locked the door behind him, he didn't bother without moving the filing cabinets because he felt silly for doing it the night before. He shed his wet jacket and shook his backpack to the desk. Then he made his preparations. Sit-up didn't take long. Within 10 minutes, Mike was planting himself in the office desk chair. Once there, Mike shifted his gaze towards all the monitors. All the power was on as it could get, and he had a clear view of everything in the monitors, inside and out. The thunder crashed, assaulting the pizzeria. The building groaned as if it's in protest. Mike's attention landed on the main interior camera. He watched a river of rainfall flow out the parking lot into the street. Satisfied that all was well in the pizzeria, Mike took his pills, turned on the cassette, and touched his paper bag, as if it was a talisman. Then he leaned forward and looked at the Nespresso poster, which he managed to repair solidly, and taped the wall opposite on the desk. Mike turned up the volume in the cassette player so it could dump the sound of the thunderstorm. Chirping birds, rustling tree branches, a gargling stream. Mike softened his gaze and allowed the pine trees, bickering dialect and by his intermittent repair and tear, no sway. As a pine needles diminished, Mike's eyes lost their focus. His lids fluttered, and they dropped. The tear mirroring the pine tree was gone. They moved seemingly in the wind, one flowing wave of gauzy green. Mike relaxed into the soothing sounds of the breeze, but he sifted when the thunder muscled its way into the breeze's wishing rim. The sun flittered through the trees, began to flicker. Or was that the lights of the office? Part of Mike's consciousness was still aware where he was in his waking state, but it was hanging on tenuously. Mike, determined to fall into the reality of the pine trees, blurred all the sounds he was hearing. He wove the thunder into creaking tree branches, and when he heard a crackling hiss and pop, he brained the static sound into the crackle of bristled pine trees. The sun, for once, bathed Mike's face with warmth, and then disappeared again, letting cool shades light over him. In and out, the light blinked. The confusion of sounds continued, and Mike frowned. What was that lower sound, off in the distance? What was that music? Mike's awareness succumbed to the fog of sleep. He found himself in a series of quick-tail impressions. The orange toy plane flies through the air. Check-up squirts. Tires spin on gravel. Mike's run. Shoving aside branches that slap his face, Mike pounds through the forest. His movements are familiar, practiced, but something strange about them. Bursting out of the trees, Mike looked down the road just in time to see the black car disappear. Why does the black car look different? Childish laughter bubbles behind Mike. He turns. As Mike rotates around, his gaze drops. He jerks in surprise as he realizes he's looking down at his adult body. This was different. But the children aren't. Mike looked at the 5 children. They're just as they were the last time they saw him. Mike watched the children, but he doesn't approach them. They watched him in return. What now? Understanding clearly that he's in a dream, but it was diverging from its norm, Mike hesitates. Then he speaks. Please, he says to the children, don't run. I just want to know what you saw. The blond boy narrows his cold blue eyes at Mike. His upper lips lift in a semi-sneer. I'm begging you, Mike says. Who took my brother? The blond boy's expression doesn't change. The other children ignored Mike. Mike runs a hand through his hair, frustrated. Why won't the kids tell him anything? He took a step forward. He raised his voice. Who took Garrett? Mike's shout spooked the children. They bolted. No, Mike yells, facing the same situation he was in before. Mike makes a distant decision this time. He chased the boy with the paper hook. Now that Mike is adult size, he can easily outrun the small kid. The boy had reddish hair, and Mike kept his gaze locked on the hair as if he ran. Even racing over the forest uneven ground, Mike quickly closed the distance. Almost upon the boy, Mike reached for the kid's shoulder. The boy spins around. Suddenly, Mike sees a flash of silver. The paper hook was sifting through the air. Something sharp sting at Mike's arm. He staggers back, stunned. He looked down his arm. His shirt sleeve gap open. The material is slashed apart. The narrow ribbon of red appears in Mike's skin. Shocked, Mike looked back at the red-haired boy. The boy, whose freckled face had a purred little noise and soft cheek, looked up at Mike with staggering, fearsome green eyes. The boy opened his mouth and unleashed a distorted, medical shriek. Mike recoils. He opened his eyes. Mike goggled at the overhead lights. They were flashing on and off with dizzy quickness. Looking away at the lights, Mike slipped his palm over his ears before the lights were only half of the assault of his senses. Screeching feedback was blaring from the intercom on the ceiling over the desk. Mike shifted his focus to the CCT monitors. He gaped at them. The monitors had gone haywire. Some of the screens were pulsing random flashes of colored lights. Some were streaming incredibly lines of binary code, which were entwined around twisted, distorted images. Abruptly, a frenetic 80s rock song blasted at the overhead speaker. Mike jolted at the sound, nearly falling from his chair. Throwing out an arm to steady himself, Mike knocked his pill bottle onto the floor. The cap wasn't on tight, the little white pills scattered over the black and white aluminum. Mike's gaze shot from the pills and the intercom. He grabbed his head with both hands. "Stop!" Mike yelled, even though he knew hysterically wasn't going to help. But he couldn't help himself. His senses were extracted. He was totally overwhelmed. Standing, Mike spun one way into the other. What should he do? On the verge of totally losing it, Mike got help from his memory banks. His brain provided him with an inner Rangon replay. Fair warning, Ragnar voice said into Mike's head. The power can be a bit screwy. If you have any issues, you find a system breaker in the main office. Just give it a flip. Mike stood, starting to turn towards the circuit box. Mike did a double take, his gaze flipping towards the window of the office door. The frost glass looked perfectly normal. Mike could see well enough through the glass to reassure himself that nothing was out there. But had it been? Mike could have sworn he'd just gotten a glimpse of one eye watching him through the glass. One eye and one eye patch. Could... Mike shook his head. No way. He imagined it. Probably because of his dream. The rock music cursored. The lights started going out and off even faster. That's enough. Giving the frosted window one more glance, nothing was there. Mike sprinted to the circuit breaker. He grabbed the lever and shoved it downward. Everything went black, and the building was filled with blessed silence. Even the thunder had stopped. The red emergency bulb above the circuit clock clicked on. Mike leaned back against the wall and tried to get a grip on himself. His breathing was coming to a rapid gasp. His pulse was so fast that it felt like a Formula One race was being run in his veins. His ears were ringing from the relentless arterial assault. Mike shook at the near darkness for a few seconds. Then his skin prickled. The darkness was unfamiliar, unfriendly, suffocating. Mike put his hand back on the lever. He shoved it upward. The comforting cling relighted the office. Mike looked at the bank of infrastructural bulbs. They were dim, but they were steady. Stepping over the desk, Mike looked at the monitors. They were back to normal. Mike exhaled lightly. His pulse began to steady itself, and an instant buzzer revved up Mike's pulse again. The buzzer came once, twice, 3 times. Mike leaned over and scanned the monitors. He frowned. Center in front of the entrance camera, a uniformed police officer stood in the steady rain, finger on the building's doorbell. The thunder might have been embedded, but the storm was still dumping torrents of water in the pizzeria. Mike peered at the wavy CCTV feed. Between the poor resolution, the rain, and the officer's hooded poncho, Mike couldn't make out the officer's face. All he could see was a pale fuzzening within the hood. Even when the officer looked up at the camera and waved. Bracing himself for whatever was going to come next, Mike pulled open one of the pizzeria's heavy entrance doors. He peered out the rain-puckered Chad officer. Close up in real life, instead of an old, hazy CCTV screen, the police officer's face was clear. And it belonged to a woman. The female officer smiled at Mike. "About time," she said in a pleasing, soothing voice. "I was starting to think you fell asleep on the job." Mike, still disturbed by the commotion of the office and puzzled by why the cop wasn't at the pizzeria door, blinked at the woman like an idiot. He couldn't seem to get his brain to engage properly. Didn't help the unexpected cop at the door was a very pretty cop. Even though Mike couldn't see the woman's hair or body under the bulky rain gear, he could see enough of her big blue eyes, her high flushed cheeks, and her wide, unturned mouth to find her looks unsettling. Mike, having had little time or inclination to date, often get flustered when he was around a pretty woman. A pretty cop was even more muddling. But he had to say something. Mike cleared his throat and managed, "Can I help you, officer?" "Please." Pulling off her rain pocket, the cop brushed off a few strands of streaked blonde hair from her pale face. Her hair was shiny and appeared to be long, but was currently confined with some kind of twist. "My name's Vanessa," she said. She shook the water off the parka. Water sprayed Mike's pan. He couldn't care less. Vanessa looked at Mike. "And you must be..." Now that Mike could see Vanessa's sleek hair and a slender but curvy figure in her snug, dark blue police uniform, he was even more tongue-tied. All he was capable was more idiotic blinking. Vanessa smiled at Mike with what might have been pity, or maybe she was being friendly. The new security guard? She concluded. She glanced down at Mike's arm. You're bleeding, by the way. That surprised Mike so much that he said, What? Vanessa pointed. Your arm. Mike looked down at his arm, and his mouth dropped open. It felt open so hard and so wide that his jaw might have been made to the floor. Clearly remembering his dream, he couldn't believe what he was seeing. The sleeve of Mike's black shirt was cut cleanly along the forearm. The sliced fabric was soaked in blood. That looked nasty, Vanessa said. Mike suddenly felt woozy. Yeah, he said. He wavered on his feet. Not from the bloodlust or anything. The cut was long, but it didn't look that deep. He was more dazed than badly injured. Well, Mike may look like a swaying pine tree. Vanessa took charge. She briskly stepped past Mike and started straying across the lobby. She moved in as she owned the place. Come on, Vanessa flung over her shoulder. I know where there's a first aid kit is. Mike's brows bunched. She does?